Thank you for tuning in to All Things Real Estate. Once again, here are your hosts, Brad Aagon and Gary Kelley.
So, Brad, I feel like I'm spending my summer in school. I was never a fan of summer school. It was sometimes useful if you want to get a leg up on getting caught up on something, or if your kids needed a little extra boost over the summer. But right now, we've got this massive lawsuit, multi-billion-dollar lawsuit in real estate, and it's changing how we do certain things. The net is that some sellers were annoyed and litigated because that's what you do when you're annoyed now, because they felt that when they sold their house, they were being told that they had to pay for the buyer's agent, and they didn't get to choose the buyer's agent. They didn't get to choose the amount, none of that stuff. Now, there's an argument that says that's all negotiable. They could have negotiated it. As a practical matter, from my perspective, that didn't happen. And, I'm going to say right now that our show is a short piece on a complicated thing. If people want to have the most recent information, they should go to nar.realtor and they can get the information there. This is just two guys having breakfast and chatting about things. It's not an official document reflecting NAR, Fairway, Castanetti, or anybody else. It's just two guys chatting. Right. So, Brad, now we have to negotiate the buyer's fee, the compensation, we can't call it commission. I like success fee, but that didn't seem to make it. So my question to you, Brad, is, so what do you see changing in our business because of this?
Well, I think it changes a lot of the back and forth between the buyer and or the buyer agent with regard to the seller. It creates a conversation that necessarily didn't have to be there before, but now has to be there because of some of the changes made. And, just to highlight for the folks that may not be aware of the intricacies of what it was before and what it is as of the middle of August.
August 17th.
August 17th.
And by the way, Brad, that's not when the lawsuit, when all that's ratified. That's just the National Association of Realtors, which I will refer to as NAR, put this approach out there. And the Department of Justice has said, yeah, okay, for now. We'll get back to you on that. So we're moving forward without an agreement that's totally signed off by any stretch. So, right. And then the local MLS Property Information Network, or MLS PIN, they've decided not to go this path. So there's a couple of different things in play. And I say that only to say whatever we're talking about, we should consider as what it is today, but certainly preliminary.
But I agree with you, Gary, 100%. But let's take a step back. Let's explain to our listeners and viewers what it was. I'll let you elaborate on that, since that's more your kind of area.
Well, what it was is we would sit down with a seller and they would say, we want to sell our house. Great. And we would agree on a percentage. I'm going to use 4% as just an example for purposes of this show. And we would there was a section in the listing paperwork that said, how will that 4% be broken up? How much will stay with the listing agent and how much will go to the buyer's agent? And, some people religiously cut that in half. Others felt that the listing sides had more expenses, so they needed to retain a little bit more. But the bottom line is that was all decided before the house hit the market. Okay. The buyer had no say in that. And frankly, you'd go around and you'd say, well, it doesn't cost you anything to have an agent come work with you because it's paid for by the seller. Now, it was paid for by the transaction, but that's a nuance at this point. So they want to be able to have the buyer have control over what they're paying for their services.
So just to elaborate on that, the seller, this did not impact the seller other than the fee that they agreed to for our listeners. So basically, if the seller in Gary's example agreed to pay a 4% commission on the sale price, that commission was then listed. That's all the seller's obligation was. And then that commission was split between the listing agent who listed the property and the selling agent or buyer agent, the agent that might be representing the buyer if they had a buyer agent, that their commission was in fact paid for by a portion of what the seller had agreed to. And that's what the way the business has been for many, many, many years. Over as long as I've been doing this, over 30 years, they called it a co-broke fee. That's how co-broke fees worked. The lawsuit came basically was that the sellers were paying for the buyer's commission, and they felt that that was unreasonable, and the sellers felt that they had no choice but to do that based on the way the industry worked. And so this lawsuit, as you said, there's still many things. There's nothing that's completely signed. There's some as far as a settlement, but basically what has changed is the as of the 17th. As part of that listing agreement now, there is no official co-broke fee that is listed as part of that transaction. So the seller will make an arrangement with the listing agent for whatever they feel is reasonable to market that property. The buyer and the buyer's agent will have to investigate by conversations, talking to the listing agent, if the seller has agreed to pay all of the buyer's agent fee, some of the buyer's agent fee, or none of the buyer's agent fee.
That's where I part with the legal people. In my mind, the way it was, we had total visibility on what the commission structure was on the deal, the buy side, the sell side. Okay, now a seller may be offering something to the buyer's agent, but we can't publish that anymore. Okay. Now you can publish it on a separate website. So if you go to movewithgary.com and look at one of my listings, I can list there what the seller commission is. I mean the buyer's commission. I don't know. I know that it's supposed to be better, but it doesn't seem like that provides the transparency that they were hoping for. But in the spirit of what's going on, there are brokerages. Lamakia is one. Compass is one where they've come out and said, we are no longer going to show what the seller is willing to pay the buyer's agent. We believe that is in the spirit of the lawsuit and the resolution. And so we're just not going to do it. Okay. So what that means is if I'm representing a buyer and there's a house that, I have to call that agent and say, are you offering any money? And then there's this whole thing that, if they are, great. How do I represent that in the documentation? One thing would be, let's get a seller's concession. But then you start to, the thoughts start to unravel when you say seller concession in my mind. Because if the seller concedes to put in 2%, I'm picking a number, just a random number, not one that's based on fact over time. If the seller agrees to pay the buyer's agent 2%, okay, then how does that get represented in the transaction? Can it be financed? What if the house doesn't appraise with that number in there? What if they look for something different? Those are the things where I think the devil's in the details and it starts to fall apart for me, at least.
Well, I agree with you. And I think that, I saw the new, obviously the Mass Association of Realtors has adopted their forms. I actually saw an offer, my first one, come across under the new form this weekend, and it has different verbiage in there, and it has a different portion where it dictates what the seller, if any, will be paying. So it's an integral part of the offer now. So if someone is saying they're going to offer a $400,000 property, and the buyer's agent fee, we'll just use your example, is 2%. When you write that $400,000 offer, you have to dictate that the seller will be paying the buyer's agent, $8,000, or 2% of the purchase price has to be written into the offer. The other portion of this comes into play, and that is when the buyers sign a buyer agency agreement with a buyer agent to represent them, that fee that they agree to before they've ever found the house, before they've ever made an offer, is either going to be a percentage or a flat number, whatever it is. And the jury's still out as to what the norm is going to be for that number. And also, they've agreed to that before they have put that property under agreement. So in our example, if they agree to, let's say, 2%, and that seller comes back and says, listen, I'll sell you the house for $400,000, but I'm not paying the 2% to the buyer agent. If they accept if that seller accepts, I guess that would be a counter offer now, right? Because they would change the form. Now the seller's no longer paying the buyer's fee. Now the buyer has to say, well, not only am I coming up with my down payment, but I owe my buyer agent $8,000 on this transaction.
Right. So I don't know what form to put this on, but we got to pay some bills. So we're going to take a break here.
Okay.
And then we'll come right back and we'll continue the conversation.
Sounds good, Gary.
Once again, thank you for watching All Things Real Estate. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Brad or Gary.